For what we're missing within cannot be replaced from without. The emptiness dodging us emanates from the places where we have lost contact with our deepest self.
Sometimes I wish I could just be like, yep, so here is the Bible, you know?
Yes.
Because it's so, that is 100% so true.
That's why Jesus came.
100%. Well, we are back, and I am so excited because we are going to be talking about another book. And for those of you guys who haven't caught some of our earlier podcasts, I am a book reader and lover of all books, nonfiction, fiction, you name it, I'll pick it up. But today we are going to be discussing, The Myth of Normal. That's right. I'm in here already. The Myth of Normal by Maté. And we're so excited because this topic is touchy and a bit intense. And I do think that we're trying to merge science and faith. And so join us on this journey as we go through this conversation.
Yeah. Hey, look, Kayleigh, you bought the hard cover.
I know.
I bought the soft cover because I want to bend it.
I kind of do love a soft cover or like a paperback book. I miss them, but I couldn't find it when I bought it. So
okay. But all that to say, this is a pretty big book.
Yeah.
It's an intense book.
Yeah. And it took us a while to get through it.
Yes, we did. A couple months.
Yeah.
At least for me.
It did, because we got it a while ago and we knew we were going to touch on it, but it definitely took a while. And so I think we're really trying to cover a lot of information that we cannot possibly cover throughout this book.
No way.
So we're going to do a very kind of broad stroke conversation on some of the pieces we saw that were super important or maybe impacted us throughout our conversation. But we are not going to touch on all of it. So that will be for you to pick up if you decide to pick up the book.
That's right. Well, and I chose this book because we're having this conversation about family dynamics, and there's obviously a lot of science behind how we affect generationally one another.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Generationally. Yeah. It's a tricky word.
And this book has sold over 1 million copies, right? It's a lot of people are reading this. People want to know about their, what to do about their traumas experience, how to understand, and so I picked it up because this is what people are reading.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm curious, how is the world trying to solve this problem? Yeah. And I'm glad I read it. It was definitely beefy. It's got a lot of stories of, anecdotal stories of people, which in that one sense, they made it interesting to listen to because I like stories. But it also has a lot of information that caused me to go, whoa, wow.
Yeah.
I had to go listen to that again.
Yeah.
Some of it I didn't agree with. I don't know. I don't think I would have landed there, but I still appreciated the amount of good information that he provided in this book.
Absolutely. I have read a fair bit of science-based nonfiction books. Something I actually really enjoy doing, not because I necessarily believe all of it or agree with all of it, but I just like hearing about studies and how people process. And so I really appreciated this book for that, for the same aspect that I got out of these other books, which is like, okay, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt and appreciate it. It's basically talking about how we look at our world today and like what we consider maybe normal, ourselves, our bodies as normal, but maybe that's not really accurate. And we are so based off of our culture, our experiences, our trauma, and not just ours, but just like we talked about on our last podcast about It Didn't Start With You. Mm-hmm. That one's really talking about, how it comes from our parents and our grandparents. And I think Gabor did a lot of that too within this book, where it was kind of not just based off of you and your experiences, but the experiences of your parents and also your community as a whole.
And nature around you. I mean, he was connecting everything. That is one thing I really appreciate about him. He uses this term biorelational. We are it's not just that we are relational in the sense of two people connecting. We connect with each other through our physicality. We connect with nature through our physicality. Yeah. We are dependent on each other. I think it flies against the face of our cultural mindset of being hyper individualistic.
Yes.
And that, I can control my environment. If I can, then I'm not affected by everyone else, but we affect one another. Yeah. So I really, really appreciate that everything that happens to us or the things that we are experiencing, in some sense, we are affecting other people, and other people are affecting us. We're affecting nature, and nature is affecting us. And that is the way it will always be. We are dependent.
Yeah, I know. I think it had a lot of that, which I thought was really cool. It was interesting. There was one example he gives where like a city in Hungary, I think it was, when he like was growing up. He's from Hungary.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so when he was growing up, he experienced this town in which they could go to the park and play and kind of hang out. But now when he goes there, there's like a McDonald's and a highway. And so the way to connect even with local kids for other kids has really shifted. And he talked about that kind of concrete jungle that we now raise a lot of our kids in, even in places that maybe aren't as populated as places like the United States or areas of the United States, are still dealing with the impacts now. And I thought it was really interesting because for me, it challenged the conversation I had done when I read The Anxious Generation, which talked about we have this fear of how much things are changing, but in reality, like we're safer, if not just as safe as we were then. And so really just letting your kids explore into their world. And so I felt like it kind of gave me some interesting insight, which is like, okay, there are changes. We can't really deny those changes. However, how do we still kind of show up as parents and to our kids in a way that allows them space into their own experiences?
Yeah, that's good.
I am so excited to bring to you my Christian reviews of regular books. My Christian reviews of regular books go over fiction books, and if a fellow believer may or may not want to be reading them, you can do so by heading to our YouTube channel and checking out all of the different reviews that I've done. Now, I read over 200 books a year, and that is so that I can give you the most amount of information possible so that you can decide if the book is right for you. Go ahead and check it out on our YouTube channel.
I'm going to read a little section at the beginning that I think is sort of at the core of what he's trying to talk about.
Yeah.
He says this. He says, health and illness are not random states in a particular body or body part. They are, in fact, an expression of an entire life lived, one that cannot in turn be understood in isolation. It is influenced by, or better yet, it arises from a web of circumstances, relationships, events, and experiences.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's really good at diagnosing the problem. And he says that himself later in the book, in that, you know, we are sicker than ever. Like in one sense, like you say, we are, maybe things are just as safe. We're a little too scared, but at the same time, we are sicker than ever. There's more depression, more people on medications for depression, high level of addiction. I mean, when COVID happened, like addiction shot up, divorce shot up. I mean, we are struggling as a culture in many ways. But at the same time, we're saying, well, this is normal. This is what happens. This is how we are supposed to live, you know. And what he's saying is, no, that's not normal. And there is a way to heal from this. You don't have to live with that, but you're going to have to consider that a lot of things work together towards what you're experiencing. Yeah. And you have to really kind of look at it the whole, not just a part of it.
Totally.
Right?
And I think that's where I find such a unique balance with it, because I do agree. Like, I think we can't look at just one side of this coin. I think what he says is so good. I think what he puts in there is so important. And I do think our bodies are made up of multiple different things, from experiences to emotions to pasts to futures to communities to all of these things. And at the same time, I look at that and I think it's not playing into the whole picture. I think that there's another side to that conversation that says, you know, maybe that has to do with just how we are evolving and changing. Of course, things like obesity, you know, addiction, those things obviously are a result of like a lot of this stuff. But I think sometimes I look at how our society is evolving as well, and I wonder if it's not,
like technology.
Yeah,
and
like
that.
those are also changes that are coming with pros and cons, you know? So I think that there's just so two sides to this equation, but I love what he has to say about it. And I think it's so good for us to really like kind of look at that and acknowledge the full picture of what we're dealing with.
I just realized, I don't think he spent a whole lot of time on technology, did he?
He didn't.
He didn't, which affects us a great deal. That's interesting. You just brought that up.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is no way we're going to cover
the
all
whole
of
book.
this.
Yeah.
So we're trying to give you like the general view if you've never read this book, so you get an idea. But let's kind of go to some of the chapters that were most interesting, impactful, challenging.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, and what you just said, I think plays a role into it. And I feel like I have a very a unique dynamic because I suffer with multiple chronic illnesses.
Yes,
and
okay.
he goes over chronic illnesses both in the like science side of it and in the healing or like what you can do side of it. And so I thought it was a really interesting conversation in that he really was like, oh, you just have to dig deep enough into the well of your life and figure out what triggered it, and then you're going to be healed.
Or you'll at least find your path to healing.
Yes.
Maybe.
Well, I think a lot of what he says, though, is really like, oh, but look at this person who was healed by it. Look at this person who was healed by it, right? And listen, I would love to be healed of my chronic illnesses. I think that there's actually been a phase in my life in which God did heal, and I was pain-free for years, and it was fantastic. And I also got sick again, you know? And so I think that there's kind of this very interesting process where I look at that situation and think, well, it's so much more complicated than that. And I don't think that we can just pin that as the only thing, is that it's mental. And once we heal the mental or the emotional, then everything else will fall in line. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. For example, he mentioned studies that were done with MS, the people who have MS, which is really fascinating, how doctors say that many MS patients are super kind people, very kind, and they're very generous with others, and that kind of almost extreme kindness means that they're not caring for themselves. And because they're not caring for themselves, their body is sort of like, I think didn't he write the book on When the Body Says No?
Oh, yeah.
Right? I think that's his book too. His idea where we're not listening to our body, and eventually our body just like says, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
And he says they're found in studies that that's common with MS patients. Not everybody.
Yeah.
But some people, and when they get more in touch with their own needs and caring for themselves, that they actually can do a lot better. And he tells stories of a woman who had MS, and she became much more in tune with her body's, her needs, like slowing down, being kind to herself, and actually being able to get off of the medications for MS, and do well. Not that the MS is gone. In fact, I think he even mentions that the scan, what is it they do? They do an MRI?
It's a MRI or CAT scan.
Right, where they can see, the central nervous system has inflammation. She still had that marker.
Yeah.
But she's not on medication. She's able to live much more better.
Yeah, much more manageable.
And more healed.
Yeah.
So he talked about that. And I thought about you too.
Yeah.
I thought about your situation, thinking, okay, well, if this is true, like what traumas?
Yeah.
What kinds of things have my daughter gone through?
Yeah. And
it's emotional when I think about it,
Yeah.
Like what has she gone through that, if this is the case, that has caused her body to kind of attack itself.
Yeah.
That's what's, autoimmune diseases is the body attacking itself.
It's basically the immune system starts arguing with its own body instead of arguing against germs from the outside coming in.
Right. So that's an internal attack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which I think, okay, so for those of you guys who don't know, which probably a lot of you don't, it's been a while. I've had, my first autoimmune disease was diagnosed when I was 22.
Early.
Yeah. So it's been over 10 years of dealing with it. And there have been seasons where I have been bedridden, had to use a cane, had to really change my entire life because of it. I couldn't work. It changed everything, But then you look at the other side of that equation, and like today, I'm walking around doing everything normal. I exercise more than the average person, even for, my body. And yes, I have to take medication. Yes, I have to do all of these things to help moderate those symptoms. But overall, my healing and health is significantly better than I was 3-4 years ago. And we can very much pinpoint emotions associated with that timeline, right? Like, I'm not going to say it was 100%, but my previous marriage was very stressful, and it was constantly at a place where I was dealing with a lot and had a lot of insecurity and unsureness about next steps and what that looked like for myself. And so I think that probably played a major role into my overall health and healing and just ability to take care of myself, right? Like I was taking care of my ex-husband, and I was taking care of my kids, and I was doing all of these things that probably played a big role into my overall health and healing. Mm-hmm. However, I can say today, yes, I take great care of myself, both in diet and exercise. I also have done a lot of work to heal with therapy and time and process. I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel feel like I'm pretty emotionally aware of good days, bad days, and days in between.
You used to use the term spoons.
Yes.
Like you're very self-aware of, hey, I've used up my spoons for the day. For those of you who have any kind of autoimmune disease, you know what that means, right? That there's only so much energy for the day, and you have to manage that well.
Yes.
Right?
And if you haven't heard of it, you should Google the spoonie theory, because that's what it's all about. It's a story that was used and utilized to help explain the limit of our energy compared to maybe another person who's otherwise healthy. And so, so I feel like my limits and my spoons per day were much less than they are today. Like, I am on a very good routine. So in a lot of ways, I feel like, okay, I've done the work, but I'm still sick. You know what I mean? So it's like, why is that? And of course, I can go into the healing journey, which I don't think is appropriate for this book or today, but I also have had God's healing and step over my life in that too. And that was for a season. And so I look at that situation, it's like, it's so much more complicated than just doing the emotional work. And I think probably a lot of people truly who are going through similar situations are like, I don't have the capacity to do emotional work when I'm fighting for my life or my livelihood right now. You know, like, I think chronic illness takes so much of your body and your mindset. It requires so much work to like really just process through every day. Then adding, it's actually on me to do this emotional healing. I just feel like we discount people's journeys and experiences with it, how complicated it is.
That's good.
When we talk about it that way.
Yeah. And obviously, one of the critiques that people have against this book or Gabor is that, there is this sort of almost too simple of a connection between trauma and, say, cancer or some of these diseases that isn't so simple. There's a lot of reasons why people have the disease. Many of them we don't even know. And so, it isn't as simple as go and solve your emotional situation, your past trauma, or even how you interact with the world. For example, with the MS patients, right? That they're being too selfless, that there's such a thing as being so selfless that you actually harm yourself. And so that is, it'd be nice. It's almost like taking a pill.
I know.
Right? If I just do this, I'm going to be well. And it may not. In the case of the woman he even talks about, again, she still has the disease, but now she's treating it differently. That I kind of understand. That, you take medication. Maybe you find some ways to increase. I'll say, for example, a person who has diabetes. Or maybe not type 1 diabetes, but type 2 diabetes, that you go, okay, I need the medication, my body's out of control. But if I change my diet, if I do some exercise, change my lifestyle, my need for medication reduces, and I can now balance this off better. And I feel like in the same way, yes, if you're dealing with some sort of illness, you have to take in consideration your relationships, your past traumas, your stressful situations in your life, the setting that you're living in. Like in your case, you were living in a very hostile home. And so how could you possibly get well when you were dealing with that much stress on top of it? And now you can manage your medications because everything else is in a better place.
Right? And I have to believe, it is so hard sometimes for people who struggle mentally, maybe from trauma, maybe from just like chronic or mental health conditions, right? Depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, which may not be as a result of like childhood trauma. It may just be how you're genetically wired. That it is extraordinarily hard to then hear, if I just do the work, then it will be better. And even if they know, I just do the work and then it'll be better, it doesn't mean that they can necessarily do that work. When someone is in extreme depression or anxiety, don't you think they don't want to feel that way? You know what I mean? Like they're in a situation they can't control necessarily, and they're doing the best that they can. And so I just like want to comfort people who maybe read this book and then feel like, well, how am I supposed to do that? That feels overwhelming. And I agree. I think it is overwhelming. I think it's like way too much. And I think that's where I always go back to, this is not a topic to take what we say and then that's it. Or take what Gabor says and say, okay, that's it. This is like, requires a whole lot of healing work on the other side of it. This is very much like a 10,000 foot view of a study or information. And then you have to really kind of play that into your life.
Yes.
You know, on the other side, something I thought was so interesting was when he talks about pregnancy,
yes,
women in pregnancy, which did kind of go over what we had talked about last time with It Didn't Start With You, but also just the care that pregnant women should have, like how they should be cared for and how they should like kind of take a step back and not be pushing as hard. I've been pregnant twice, and I was definitely like that when I was pregnant. But it's been so long, I kind of forgot. Like, oh yeah, I did slow down. I did, need to kind of take a step back.
Yeah. Yeah. He talks about, hey, we're making a baby here.
Yeah,
right? This is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so that everyone I love that too. In one sense, it made me a little terrified, only in the sense of like, oh, wow, for the women who live in a hostile environment or who are dealing with so much stress while they're pregnant, that so much that is affecting the child.
Yeah.
And they may not be able to do anything about their circumstances, right? So that hurt my heart. But for those who can, and this is again where some of the critique of the book is it's a bit of like, wait, some people can have that luxury, other people can't.
Right.
But those who can, who have an encouraging environment and people around them that care for them, then that will benefit the child, not just the mom, but the child.
Yeah.
I also thought it was really good when he talked about how important our intuition is.
Yeah.
How we kind of have fallen out of touch with our sense of how are we supposed to care for our bodies? How do we care for a child? And how even in parenting, society in culture questions our intuition and makes us question ourselves.
Yeah.
But there's so much that we are kind of wired already to know.
Yes.
When the baby's born and how you are to connect to the baby. I mean, I think you talked about this a little bit with Mackenzie.
Yeah. Because Kenny, so when I gave birth to Kenny, she was humongous. She was almost 10 pounds. She had blood sugar issues, but also I had to be on medications through both my pregnancies. And the hospital's policy with Kenny was basically like, we want to keep an eye on her. I cannot explain to you how traumatized I was. Like, I shut down the hospital room. I said, no one in or out. You were there and my ex-husband was there, and I would not let anyone else be in there because I felt so overwhelmed with the concept, even though it's just the NICU, she's fine. But like,
they took her away.
Feral response that like she was removed from my access when I'd carried her for 10 months. She was like my baby, and that he really talks about that, about like how the science shows that it's just anti what women know intrinsically within themselves, that when the baby is born, the baby comes to me, know, and that now it like makes so much sense that anxiety new moms feel, and like not just new moms, but like new moms of a new baby. You know what I mean? So like if you have 10 kids, you may still feel that same experience where when that new baby is with you, you still feel this like deep closeness to them. That anxiety is very easy to come. Like maybe that's why PPD is much more common. It's not just the hormones, but it's like a deep awareness of this is still wholly dependent on me.
Yeah.
And I still feel ultimately so connected to this little body. So I thought that was so cool and so
very affirming, right?
Yes.
And it's so good to see hospitals improving and putting the baby in the mom's arms and not cutting the cord right away and not taking the baby out of the room. I mean, when I had all of you were whisked away.
That's so
I did not have that experience of the baby being put on me.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, for short time, just real quick, and then off you go. Whereas I watch you with your girls, I watch Melissa with her son, and the baby was kept with you. You had a golden hour.
Yeah.
I love that.
Like everyone left.
Yes.
As long as the baby was
two
healthy.
Of you can be with the baby. And, so these things. And of course, when parents have a child and the baby has to go to NICU because of some complication, we need to be, as a community, so much more compassionate to the trauma that mother and that child are experiencing in that separation. I feel like he gave words to that.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful that as a society, we're growing to wisdom there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure way back when people, were having children in a village somewhere, they had that wisdom. He even talks about some cultures even today that have that wisdom. Somewhere along our scientific journey, we kind of went away from that. And I'm glad to see us come back to that intuition.
Yeah. I agree. I do think that like hospitals even are like very much kind of going that way, but I don't think it's ever communicated. Like, I was not told in the middle of this journey, like, hey, it's going to be normal for you to desire that closeness with your child, and we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that that's possible, right? Although I was like at an emotional point with Kenny at that stage, I think that if they had made that comment to me, it would have made me feel like, okay, they're at least on my side. Like, I had this animalistic, you're taking away my baby reaction that I could not explain in the moment, other than like, why does no one understand why this is so emotionally?
And you feel like you're going crazy.
Totally.
Even though what you're doing, your reaction is very normal and actually beautifully instinctive and essentially good for you and for the baby.
Yes.
Right? But everyone makes you question yourself. So that chapter on parent, that was a really good one.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The other thing that struck me was the conversation on addiction. Now, Maté is very experienced with addiction. Not only did he experience his own journey of addiction struggle, but he also worked with people with addictions for quite a while. And what I really appreciated was how he explained often people who go towards some sort of substance or behavior, addictive behavior, are trying to cope with a trauma. In fact, he even talks about how the addiction, this was like, what?
Yeah.
How the addiction itself could be a form of grace, in the sense that if someone is unable to cope with something happening in their lives, if they don't have a way to go somewhere, a way to escape that for that moment, they could harm themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Because they can't cope.
Yes.
There's just this. So in some ways, sometimes addiction is a way to go find a way to cope. Now, ideally, and he says this, there are consequences to addiction. There's a lot of damage that occurs, relational damage. You get behind in life. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And indeed, in your addiction journey, you can even take your life, right?
Yeah, totally.
So it's a very dangerous way to go.
Yeah.
But still, you can look back and hopefully find healing. Especially if you look for healing in the process of trying to recover from your addiction, you can find a healing and you'll learn things that someone who hasn't gone on that journey doesn't know. Like you and I haven't been so desperate in our lives that we feel the need to escape through some form, of drug or whatever. So we don't know what it's like to bring ourselves back out of that. He says a person who's gone through addiction and can come back and be healed, they have a whole level of understanding of their lives themselves that the rest of us don't.
Right.
So I thought of, people in my life that I know who have struggled with addiction, and I thought, wow, there's things I can learn from them.
Right.
Those who have been able to
Who've
recover.
come through the other side. Because that other side, I think, is also part of it. That means you realize that you had gone too far, that you needed a better way, and then you did the hard work. Right? Like, which
takes a lot of work.
If you're also dealing with a trauma in the midst of that, that is 10 times harder because you're trying to move through trauma and you're trying to move through healing from addiction, which addiction on itself is so complicated, right? It's so interesting because I do really appreciate what he has to say. And I think there's so much to that, alcohol and drugs really do kind of like dampen the emotion and they help us forget or ignore. And that's why people tend to struggle with addiction, is they're trying to cope from something. And I can like look back at people in my life who've struggled with addiction and say, oh yeah, okay, I can see there was like a trigger point. There was something where you felt like you're not winning, and so therefore I have to go to this because I don't have a better tool or skill. And so I almost wonder if it's like, if it's your kid, let's say, and you're at that point where you start to notice that they're struggling, like that's the point. Take a step back, get them into therapy, get them help, because you're noticing, like, yes, the drugs need to be taken care of, but the problem's bigger than that. Something happened. And I don't know that I know of someone who chose addiction who has not struggled with a true trauma or a lifetime of mental illness that ultimately led towards maybe that trauma.
Right. A lot of people say that in some forms of addictions, people are self-medicating.
Yeah.
Again, we're not trying to excuse addiction, but I think, listen, in my own journey, my father was an alcoholic. And so I grew up with my alcoholic uncle, an alcoholic father who left us. So I was super judgmental and down on addicts. Yeah. Because there were people who ruin everybody else's life. That was my mindset, and I feel like I've learned to have more compassion and empathy and even curiosity for someone who's experiencing an addiction situation, or especially those who have gone down that journey and suffered greatly, because they do, and then being able to come back. I mean, there's a journey there that I can learn from. Just I can be more interested in versus saying, oh, you did that. I think sometimes we judge.
100%.
And this sort of helped me have a different mindset.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that. I have a friend of mine who had reached out, and she, in her town, had a friend her whole life. And that friend ended up having a really tough situation, a trauma happen, and she turned to drugs. And my friend lost touch with this friend and happened to find her on the street, homeless, just totally suffering and trying to hide it. I'm fine. And so she asked, what do I do? Like, I don't know how to love her. My heart is breaking, and I want to do the right thing, but I don't know what that looks like. And I said, treat her like a person, buy her a meal, and just be there. Because at the end of the day, this is literally, you can tell it's a result of a really tough situation that happened. And you do not know how much your presence in her day could be the difference between choosing for that next fix or choosing to go and get some help, So just treat her like a person. And I think that was one thing I really liked about Gabor's book, but I also really struggled with. I don't feel like he really gave us good closure on the end of all of this. Like, it's the same thing that happened with It Didn't Start With You. I just feel like we end and it's like, well, that's depressing. And I feel like there's nothing I can do, right? Like, my kids are 5 and 7. They've been through it, and my kids have been through it. So it's like, how do I now fix what's already happened? How do I now fix what changed? And so I do think that he gives some good information, right? But ultimately what he really kind of comes down to, or one of the big topics, is like spirituality. And, we are believers. And so I feel like, 100%, but for totally different reasons, right? Yes. And so I feel like we really see like, yes, there is an answer, and that answer is Jesus.
Right. Indeed. In fact, if we look at this big old fat book, he gets to, back here is where he gets to some solution. And he admits that he's much better at diagnosing the problem than bringing the solution. And in all the solutions he offered, everything from going back and having your own kind of mental journey of sorting out your problem, or going to a group setting where other people help you. He talked about his addiction and how he did that. He talked about actually psychedelics and, using, going to these rituals, using psychedelics. And not that he says that, he's not an evangelist for psychedelics, but he did say, hey, there's some science behind people being able to disconnect from some of the problems through these drugs, and then being able to find what's behind all of it, because there's such a hard wall between their current life and what's happened in the past. And then he gets to spirituality. And I have something I wanted to quote from that, because, again, he's struggled with addiction. So he's very familiar with the process that people with addictions go through in order to find healing. And what's the number one thing they have to do? They have to let go of control. I feel like at the end of the day, what he was sharing was, in one sense, you have control because you can look into your situation and do some work. But in another sense, you have to let go.
Letting go.
You have to let go. So I know you just read this section. This is from the back where he talks about the program, the Alcoholics Anonymous program. And, the biggest part of it is when you entrust your life to a higher power, right? Now, Gabor Maté is Jewish. He shares in the book that he doesn't really have a relationship, or any kind of connection with God per se. But even through this journey himself, he had to give up control to a higher power, God. And he says this, which I thought was really interesting. He goes, whether we know it or not, we all seek our higher power. The longing manifests in many ways: our desire to belong, our drive to know our purpose in life, the urge to escape the limitations of our conditioned, self-centered personalities, our taste for transcendent experiences. Unfortunately, in our culture, we're taught to seek fulfillment by filling ourselves with evanescent externals. It cannot be done, for what we're missing within cannot be replaced from without. The emptiness dodging us emanates from the places where we have lost contact with our deepest self.
Sometimes I wish I could just be like, yep, so here is the Bible, you know?
Yes.
Like, because it's so, like, that is 100% so true.
That's why Jesus came.
100%. And even still, like, him being Jewish, it makes my heart sad because, like, that is also, that's God, right? Like, that is still our good God. And so it's like, part of me is like, don't you see though that like God loves you, right? It says in 2 Corinthians 5:17. Isn't that the right passage?
Yes. Well, we're told, yes, well, we're told that we are a new creation. Listen,
Yes.
It says this, from now on, we do not know anyone from a worldly perspective, even if we have known Christ from a worldly perspective, yet we now no longer know him in this way. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old has passed away, and see, the new has come. It is Jesus who comes. In fact, we were created in God's image in Genesis 1. Mm-hmm. Sin comes in the world. Yeah. This is what we deal with. I mean, this whole book
is
the problem
life.
is sin, sin in us, sin, how we affect one another, right? How we hurt one another, sin, which affects our physical bodies. And then here comes Jesus. He pays the ultimate price.
Yeah.
He lives a perfect life. He pays the ultimate price. He dies on the cross. He is resurrected and shows us this is what you were created to be. This is what you're longing for, what Maté is talking about. I came to put you in touch with the image bearer that God created, a new creation.
Yeah. And the reality is like, you can read throughout scripture. I don't have it pulled up right now, right? But it tells us all the things that we are, that we are when we are made into a new creation.
Yes.
And
well, Ephesians 1.
There you go. I was going to say.
My favorite place. Okay. Anytime I'm down on myself, I go to Ephesians 1. Because Ephesians 1, Paul is like a run-on sentence.
It is. It's like
he goes on and on and on and on. But we are blessed. We are chosen. We are holy and blameless. We are predestined and adopted. We are redeemed, forgiven, given wisdom and understanding. We have an inheritance, and we have been sealed by the promise of the Holy Spirit.
So beautiful.
This is who we are. In Christ.
So it's one of those things where this book tells one side of the story. It truly tells of the story before we allow Jesus into our lives, and to truly change, to truly give us that new creation. Because it's really easy to say, okay, I believe, hello, like what's happening, right? But it's like when we truly give it to God, when we truly release control, when we truly say, okay, Jesus, I cannot do this on my own. I am broken and I am flawed and I have trauma and I have addiction and I have nothing. So I will come as I am. Please recreate me.
Amen.
You know? And I think that's so beautiful that we can truly have that we do have that every single day. Yeah. And so I think this story and what he has in here has so much great information because it gives us the science and the awareness of how other pieces play a role, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah. It diagnoses the problem from a secular perspective, which again, this is what the Bible talks about, that we live in a broken world. Mm-hmm. And it's good. Sometimes we need to be kind of punched in the face where, hey, this is, like he says, the myth of normal. You know, it isn't normal to have all this. There has to be a better way. We all know it intuitively. And the better way is the way that Jesus calls us to, right? Yes. And it's the healing, the true healing, that spiritual healing that he talks about in the book comes with a God that's big enough to love us fully, holy enough and perfect enough to make us anew, and loving enough, sacrificial enough to come and kind of come with us in our mess and kind of make us anew.
Yes.
And so, I'm thinking of the man that was blind, that Jesus came and healed. And I think in some sense we are blind to the brokenness in this world. We think, we can fix it in our own power. Yeah. We'll do this. But no, we can't.
And the story of the man who was healed in Mark is not one healing. Yes. It's not that, right? So the story is that he had mud placed on his eyes, and when the mud was washed away, he could see
partially.
Yeah, he could see like shapes, right? And like
he said everyone looked like trees.
Trees, yeah. So he was like seeing shapes, but he couldn't see the full picture. And Jesus did it again, put the mud back on his eyes, washed it away, and then he could see everything. And I think that's such a story into the reality that sometimes our saving, truly, the saving of Jesus is not one and done, but it requires us to continue alongside Jesus and with his healing power to do the work. Yeah. And I think that's what Gabor did so well, was say, do the work. You know what I mean? And I think Jesus is saying, I'm right here. I'll do it with you.
Yes,
I will step in touch.
Yeah.
And so the other aspect that we just want to encourage our listeners and watchers today to do is to get into community, right? Don't end here. Don't end with the trauma and the hard situation. And that community needs to be at your church, with a therapist, with a friend. It needs to be in a place where you're truly building that relationship with Jesus and with others who can walk alongside that with you.
So good. So good. Be in scripture.
Yes.
Right? I mean, yes, read these books. I'm not against reading these books, but read them and then put them in context with what scripture says.
Yeah.
Because, when you read them, so far we've read 2 books, what left us sort of like, wait, but there is a way. There is a way. Not to minimize science or minimize therapy or any of that.
Yeah.
But to say, coming alongside the work of the Spirit, the work that God has done, that's where true healing takes place.
Totally.
We get saved once, but we get healed over time. Yeah. And that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. This has been an amazing conversation. We don't want the conversation to end here. We would love for you to continue on. So leave a comment if you're watching us. If you want to also continue the conversation via email, you can email us at hello@trochia.org. And please, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can stay up to date with what's happening every single week. And truly, we're doing book reviews all the time too. So if you're wanting more in-depth book reviews, make sure to follow us there. And we can't wait to talk to you guys on the next one.